Not in the moments where everyone is watching. Not in the hours filled with applause, recognition, or visible struggle. But in the small, almost invisible choices that feel too ordinary to matter. The kind of choices you make when no one is there to measure you, when there is no urgency, no pressure, no consequence that seems immediate or real. You wake up one morning and reach for your phone before your mind has even fully returned to the world. It feels harmless, just a habit, just a way to ease into the day. You tell yourself you deserve comfort. You tell yourself you will focus later. Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes a year. And somehow, without noticing the precise moment it happened, you find yourself living a life you never consciously chose. Most people believe destiny announces itself with noise. They imagine turning points as storms, loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. They expect transformation to arrive like a cinematic scene, a sudden realization, a surge of motivation, a decision so powerful it redraws the entire map of their future overnight. But real transformation rarely behaves that way. It enters quietly. It waits patiently. It disguises itself as something so small that the mind dismisses it before the heart even has a chance to recognize its weight. There is a silent choice available to you every single day. It does not demand heroism. It does not require perfect discipline. It does not ask you to become someone extraordinary in an instant. Instead, it asks something far more uncomfortable. It asks for honesty. Honesty about who you are becoming. Because becoming is not something that happens once. It is happening now, in the background of your routines, inside your repeated thoughts, within the patterns you know. Longer question, you are always moving toward a version of yourself. The terrifying part is that most people never realize they are moving at all. They believe they are standing still, waiting, preparing, surviving. They assume that life will truly begin later, when conditions are right, when confidence appears, when clarity finally replaces confusion. But life does not wait for readiness. It responds only to direction. And direction is not determined by grand declarations. It is determined by a single silent choice repeated over time, a choice so subtle that it can either build a powerful identity or quietly erase one tonight or tomorrow morning, or in some ordinary moment that feels completely forgettable. You will face this choice again. The question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you will see it, or whether, like most people, you will let the decision that defines who you ultimately become pass by unnoticed. Stop. Asterisk. There was a time when life felt quieter. Not peaceful. Just quiet in a way that made everything blend together. Days did not feel heavy enough to be called difficult, yet they were not light enough to feel meaningful. They moved with a strange, unremarkable rhythm. Morning alarms, familiar routines, conversations that repeated themselves in slightly different forms. Evenings that disappeared into glowing screens or restless thoughts that never seemed to lead anywhere. From the outside, nothing appeared wrong. Responsibilities were being handled. Expectations were being met. There was progress, at least in the ways that could be measured. Passing years, changing environments, small achievements that briefly created the illusion of direction. Friends might have described it as stability. Family might have called it maturity, but somewhere beneath the surface, a quiet tension had begun to grow. It was not dramatic enough to demand attention. It did not interrupt sleep or shatter concentration. It simply lingered like a subtle background noise that the mind learns to ignore after hearing it long enough. This was the silent life. A life built not on conscious decisions, but on momentum, habits. Inherited rather than chosen. Beliefs absorbed rather than questioned. Goals adopted because they seemed reasonable, not because they felt deeply personal. Each day added another thin layer to an identity that felt functional but strangely distant, like wearing clothes that fit well enough but never truly belonged. To you. The world encouraged this kind of living. It rewards predictability. It praises consistency. It provides endless structures designed to make existence efficient. There are systems for productivity, frameworks for success, templates for happiness. Follow the sequence. Check the boxes. Stay within the boundaries that have already been proven safe. And for a while, this works. Life moves forward without requiring too much confrontation with uncertainty. There's comfort in knowing what tomorrow will probably look like. There's relief in not having to constantly redefine who you are or what you are doing. Yet something begins to shift over time that the mind starts noticing the repetition. Not all at once, not with clarity. Just in fleeting moments during a commute. When the same scenery passes by like a looped recording.
During conversations where your own words feel rehearsed before you even speak them.
During quiet nights when exhaustion is present but satisfaction is not, you begin to sense that you are participating in your life without fully inhabiting it. This realization does not arrive with panic. It arrives with subtle curiosity. A question that forms without permission. Is this really all there is? Most people push that question away. They tell themselves it is ungrateful. They remind themselves of responsibilities, of practical limitations, of the countless individuals who would gladly exchange places. They tighten their routines. They double down on distractions. They convince themselves that meaning will naturally appear if they simply continue long enough. But meaning is not guaranteed by motion. It is created by intention. And intention requires awareness, the kind that disrupts autopilot. In the silent life, awareness feels dangerous. It threatens the fragile comfort built from predictability. To truly look at your patterns is to risk discovering that you have been living according to scripts you never consciously approved. Yet the longer this awareness is delayed, the more permanent those scripts become. Days turn into months. Months turn into years, and the identity formed through unconscious repetition begins to feel irreversible. Not because change is impossible, but because the idea of change starts to feel unrealistic, impractical, even unnecessary. You adapt to the quiet, you learn to perform. Stability. You become skilled at appearing certain. Until one day, something shifts. Not around you, but within. You and the life that once felt acceptable suddenly feels too small to contain the person you are slowly becoming. Change rarely begins with inspiration. It begins with friction. Not the kind that explodes into visible conflict or dramatic breakdowns. The real breaking point is often quieter than that. It unfolds gradually, almost respectfully, as if life itself is giving you time to notice what you have been avoiding. At first, it feels like a slight misalignment. You continue doing what you have always done, but something about it no longer fits with the same ease. Tasks that once required no effort now feel strangely heavy. Conversations that used to feel natural begin to feel distant, as though you are observing yourself from somewhere outside the moment. You cannot point to a single cause. Nothing catastrophic has happened. No major failure, no sudden loss. If someone were to ask what is wrong, you would struggle to give an answer that sounds convincing even to yourself. Yet internally, the pressure is building. There is a growing awareness that you are living according to patterns that were never designed for the person you are becoming. The realization is unsettling because it challenges the illusion that time alone will eventually solve everything. It will not. Time does not correct direction. It only deepens it. This is when the breaking point begins to take shape, not as an event, but as a series of moments where the truth becomes harder to ignore. You notice how often you delay what matters. How easily you surrender to comfort even when it quietly disappoints you. How frequently you promise yourself change, only to renegotiate that promise when the moment of action arrives. You start recognizing the silent negotiations happening inside your mind. Just 5 more minutes. Tomorrow will be better. This is not the right time. These thoughts are not loud. They are reasonable, logical, compassionate in a way that almost feels protective. They present themselves as kindness toward your own limitations, but beneath that kindness, there is a subtle erosion. Each small surrender teaches your identity something. It teaches you what you tolerate. It teaches you what you avoid. It teaches you how easily your future can be traded for temporary relief. Most people reach their breaking point only when the consequences become undeniable, when opportunities disappear, when health declines, when relationships fracture, when the gap between who they are and who they once imagined becoming becomes too wide to overlook. But sometimes the breaking point arrives earlier. It arrives in a quiet moment of clarity. You are sitting alone, or walking through a familiar place, or staring at a screen after another unremarkable day. And suddenly, without warning, you feel the weight of accumulated time. Not as regret, but as recognition. Recognition that you have been present for your own life, but not fully engaged in shaping it. This realization is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it removes the comfort of blame. If no external force has been holding you back, then the responsibility becomes deeply personal. You can no longer pretend that transformation is waiting for permission from circumstances. Liberating because responsibility is also power. If your patterns were built through repetition, they can be reshaped through repetition. If your identity was constructed unconsciously, it can be reconstructed deliberately. The same silent mechanisms. That once limited, you can now become tools for expansion. Yet knowing this does not immediately change. Behavior. Knowledge alone has never been enough. The breaking point is not where transformation is completed. It is where denial becomes impossible. It is the moment when the mind finally admits that continuing in the same direction will eventually lead to a life that feels increasingly disconnected from your deeper potential. You begin to see that your future will not be determined by one heroic decision. It will be determined by what you choose in moments so small that they rarely receive recognition. And somewhere within this realization, a new kind of curiosity emerges, a question that feels ancient, as though countless individuals before you have stood at the same invisible threshold. If change is not created by dramatic events, then what is the quiet force that truly shapes who we become? Stop? Long before modern psychology gave names to patterns of behavior, before neuroscience mapped the circuitry of habit and decision, there were individuals who observed something essential about human transformation. They did not have laboratories. They had attention. In ancient temples, in remote mountains, in simple villages where life unfolded without the distractions that now dominate modern existence, seekers began to notice a quiet law governing the human mind. It was not written in sacred texts at first. It was discovered through living, through watching how thoughts turned into actions, and how actions slowly solidified into character. They saw that destiny was rarely shaped by intensity. It was shaped by repetition. A warrior did not become fearless in the chaos of battle. Fearlessness was cultivated in the unseen hours before the conflict, in the discipline of daily training, in the silent refusal to surrender to comfort, in the decision to return again and again to a practice that offered no immediate reward. A monk did not become peaceful during moments of enlightenment. Peace was built in countless ordinary mornings, when the mind wandered and was gently brought back, when impatience arose and was observed without reaction, when the desire to escape discomfort was noticed and not obeyed. These observers began to understand that identity was not a fixed essence. It was a direction. To become something was not about declaring it once. It was about choosing it repeatedly, especially when no one was watching, especially when there was no external pressure forcing the decision. This insight traveled across cultures. In the philosophies of ancient Greece, thinkers spoke about the power of habit, about how excellence was not an act but a practice. In Eastern traditions, teachings emphasized mindful action, suggesting that awareness within the smallest moment could gradually reshape the entire experience of life. Despite differences in language and ritual, a common understanding emerged. Human beings are sculpted by their silent choices, not by the intentions they announce to the world, not by the identities they perform in public, but by the micro-decisions that accumulate in private, decisions that feel too insignificant to record, yet powerful enough to redefine the trajectory of a lifetime. One ancient story tells of a student who asked his teacher how long it would take to transform himself. The teacher responded with another question. Transform into what? The student hesitated. He had imagined transformation as an outcome, a final state he could arrive at and then possess. He had not considered that transformation was something he was already participating in. Moment by moment, whether consciously or not, the teacher then pointed to a nearby stream. Watch the water, he said. At first, the student saw nothing remarkable. The stream moved gently, carving its path through the earth with patient persistence. There were no sudden movements, no dramatic shifts. Yet over time, the land itself had been reshaped by this continuous flow. You are like this, the teacher explained. Your life is not changed by force. It is changed by direction sustained. This teaching was unsettling because it removed the fantasy of overnight awakening. It suggested that becoming required endurance, not the endurance of suffering, but the endurance of attention. The willingness to remain present in moments that felt uneventful. The courage to choose alignment even when the reward was invisible. For many, this was too subtle to accept. They wanted rituals that promised instant clarity, techniques that guaranteed success, paths that eliminated uncertainty. And so they overlooked the quiet truth hidden in plain sight, that transformation is less about discovering new powers, and more about consistently honoring a single silent choice. Across centuries, this wisdom resurfaced again and again in the training grounds of warriors, in the meditative practices of monks, in the daily routines of artisans who perfected their craft through devotion to detail. Each understood, in their own way, that identity is not granted by fate, it is constructed through deliberate repetition. And perhaps the most profound part of this ancient discovery was not that change takes time, but that time is always offering the opportunity to change. Every ordinary moment becomes a doorway. Every unnoticed decision becomes a vote. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a life begins to take shape, not through dramatic declarations, but through the quiet consistency of choosing who you are becoming. For centuries, this ancient understanding remained largely philosophical, a wisdom passed through stories, rituals, and personal observation. It felt true to those who experienced it, yet difficult to explain in a way that satisfied the modern mind. Then science began to look closer, not at destiny or purpose in the poetic sense, but at the mechanisms hidden beneath everyday behavior. Researchers became fascinated with a simple question: why do human beings repeat actions that they consciously know are not aligned with their long-term goals? Why does awareness alone fail to produce change? Inside laboratories and research centers, patterns began to emerge. The brain, it turned out, is not designed for constant conscious decision-making. It is designed for efficiency. Every repeated action creates a neural shortcut, a pathway that allows behavior to occur with less effort the next time. Over weeks and months, these pathways strengthen, gradually transferring control from deliberate intention to automatic response. What ancient teachers had described as discipline or mindfulness, science began to describe as neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself through repeated experience. This discovery was both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it confirmed that identity is not fixed. The structures governing your habits, reactions, and emotional patterns are not permanent installations. They are living systems, continuously shaped by what you do, what you think, and what you avoid. Humbling because it revealed how little of daily behavior is truly conscious. Studies showed that much of what people consider choice is actually the result of conditioning. The mind predicts, conserves energy, and defaults to familiar patterns long before awareness has the chance to intervene. By the time you feel like you have made a decision, the underlying process may already be in motion. This is why change feels so difficult. It is not merely a matter of motivation. It is a matter of rewiring. Each time you repeat an old pattern, you reinforce the existing circuitry. Each time you interrupt that pattern, even briefly, you create the possibility of a new connection forming. Over time, these small interruptions accumulate, gradually shifting what once felt unnatural into something instinctive. Science began to validate what quiet observers had sensed for generations. Transformation is not a sudden leap. It is a biological negotiation. Consider the simple act of resisting a familiar distraction. In the moment, the effort feels disproportionate to the action itself. Your mind generates persuasive arguments for comfort. Your body signals fatigue. Your attention drifts toward the easiest available relief. Yet, when you remain present within that tension, when you choose differently despite the discomfort, something subtle happens beneath the surface. The brain records the deviation. It notes that another path is possible. With repetition, this alternative route becomes less fragile, more accessible. Eventually, what once required intense effort begins to feel normal. This process is rarely visible from the outside. There are no immediate external markers announcing that your internal architecture is being redesigned. Friends may not notice. Colleagues may not comment. Even you may doubt that anything meaningful is occurring, but measurable change is unfolding. Emotional resilience increases. Focus stabilizes. Impulses lose some of their authority. The distance between stimulus and response widens just enough to allow intention to participate. This is the science behind the silent choice. Every time you align behavior with the person you wish to become, you are not simply performing an action. You are altering probabilities. You are making future alignments slightly easier and future avoidance slightly harder. Conversely, each time you surrender to unconscious momentum, you are also shaping the future, reinforcing the patterns that will later feel inevitable. There is no neutral ground. The brain is always learning from what you repeat. Perhaps the most profound implication of this research is that transformation does not require perfection. It requires consistency. Even small, imperfect attempts at change accumulate into structural shifts that eventually redefine what feels possible. In this light, the ancient teaching and the modern laboratory converge. Identity is not a mystery. It is a process. Process governed by countless silent choices that gradually reprogram how you think, feel, and act, until one day you realize that the person you have become is no longer someone you have to force yourself to be. Stop. At first. Progress does not feel like progress. It feels like resistance. You begin making small adjustments. Waking slightly earlier than before. Choosing focus over distraction for a few quiet minutes. Pausing before reacting in conversations that once triggered automatic responses. These actions are not dramatic. They do not transform your external reality overnight. In fact, from the outside, your life may appear almost unchanged. This is the phase most people misunderstand. They expect growth to feel rewarding immediately. They look for visible evidence that their efforts are working. They want reassurance that the discomfort they are tolerating is leading somewhere meaningful. When that reassurance does not arrive, doubt begins to whisper that perhaps nothing important is happening at all. But invisible progress is still progress. Beneath the surface, subtle shifts are unfolding. The mind is learning that old patterns are no longer the only available options. Attention is becoming slightly more stable. Emotional reactions are losing some of their urgency. Choices that once felt impossible now feel merely difficult. These changes are quiet. So quiet that they are easy to overlook. This is why many individuals abandon transformation just before it begins to reveal itself. They interpret the absence of immediate results as failure. They mistake the early friction of change for evidence that they are not capable. They return to familiar routines not because those routines satisfy them, but because they offer predictable relief from uncertainty. Yet, those who continue discover something unexpected. Progress begins to compound. Single aligned decision makes the next one marginally easier. A week of small commitments builds a fragile sense of trust within yourself. You start noticing that you are keeping promises you once broke without hesitation. Not perfectly, not consistently, but often enough to create a new internal narrative. Perhaps, I am someone who follows through. This thought is powerful, not because it guarantees success, but because it reshapes identity. The distance between intention and action begins to shrink. The person you imagine becoming no longer feels like a distant character in a hypothetical future. He or she starts appearing in the present in fleeting but undeniable moments. You handle a difficult situation with more patience than before. You complete a task you once would have delayed indefinitely. You sit with discomfort instead of escaping it immediately. None of these moments make headlines. They do not earn applause. Sometimes no one else even knows they happened. But internally something profound is occurring. Your relationship with yourself is being renegotiated. Trust replaces doubt in small increments. With time, this invisible momentum produces visible consequences. Opportunities that once seemed overwhelming begin to feel approachable. Goals that once felt abstract start to take shape through consistent action. Others may suddenly comment on your discipline, your focus, your calm confidence. They assume the change was recent. They did not witness the months or years of silent progress that made the transformation appear effortless. This illusion is common. We tend to notice only the outcome, not the accumulation. We see the person who appears composed under pressure and assume they were always that way. We observe mastery and imagine talent, overlooking the countless ordinary choices that built the foundation. Yet, even as visible progress emerges, the real work remains internal. There are setbacks. Days when old habits resurface with surprising strength. Moments when fatigue or frustration make regression feel tempting. Invisible progress is not a straight line.
It is a gradual negotiation between who you have been and who you are becoming. The
Key difference now is awareness. You recognize that each small choice still matters. That identity is continuously reinforced or reshaped through repetition. You no longer wait for dramatic breakthroughs to validate your efforts. You understand that transformation is happening in real time, whether it feels significant or not. Eventually, something shifts in a deeper way. Discipline becomes less about forcing behavior and more about expressing identity. Focus becomes less about effort and more about alignment. The silent choice that once required courage begins to feel natural. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. And in this quiet evolution, you realize that the most powerful progress is the kind that unfolds without spectacle, yet leaves your entire life fundamentally different. Stop. Asterisk. There comes a stage in transformation when effort alone is no longer enough. You have built momentum. You have proven to yourself that change is possible. You have experienced the quiet satisfaction of keeping promises that once felt impossible to honor. Yet beneath these victories, a deeper question begins to surface. Who exactly is the person making these choices now? Because behavior can change before identity fully does. You may act with discipline while still secretly seeing yourself as inconsistent. You may demonstrate courage while privately believing you are still fearful. You may create progress in your external life while carrying an internal image that belongs to an older version of yourself. This is the subtle barrier many people encounter. They improve their actions, but forget to update their self-concept. And identity, left unexamined, has a powerful gravitational pull. It quietly draws behavior back toward familiar territory. It whispers stories about who you are allowed to be, what you are capable of sustaining, how much success or stability truly fits you. To move beyond this invisible ceiling, transformation must become intentional at a deeper level. It must become reconstruction. This process begins with noticing the language you use inside your own mind. Not the words you speak publicly, but the quiet commentary that accompanies your daily experience. The interpretations you assign to success and failure. The assumptions you make about your potential. The roles you unconsciously continue to perform. Long after they have stopped serving you, identity is not only shaped by what you do. It is shaped by what you believe your actions mean. If you complete a challenging task and dismiss it as luck, the old identity remains intact. If you maintain a new habit for weeks but describe it as temporary, you signal to yourself that regression is inevitable. In this way, progress can be undermined not by behavior, but by narrative. Reconstruction requires a different approach. It asks you to deliberately acknowledge evidence of change. To allow yourself to see consistency where you once saw chaos. To accept that the person you are becoming is not an illusion, but a result of repeated alignment. This acceptance can feel uncomfortable. For years, you may have protected yourself by lowering expectations. By assuming less, hoping less, risking less. Adopting a stronger identity feels like stepping into unfamiliar territory. It exposes you to the possibility of greater disappointment, but also to the possibility of deeper fulfillment. The mind resists this expansion at first. It clings to familiar definitions because they feel safe. Even negative self-images can provide comfort through predictability. To redefine yourself is to enter uncertainty. It is to release the scripts you have rehearsed for so long that they began to feel like truth. Yet, reconstruction is not about inventing a false persona. It is about aligning your internal story with your lived reality. When you consistently act with intention, you are no longer someone who tries. You are someone who practices. When you repeatedly choose growth over avoidance, you are no longer someone who wants change. You are someone who creates it. These distinctions may seem subtle, but they alter how the mind organizes future behavior. Identity becomes a framework, instead of relying on constant motivation, you begin to operate from self-understanding. Decisions are filtered through a simple question. What would the person I am becoming naturally do in this moment? This question does not demand perfection, it invites participation. There will still be setbacks. Reconstruction is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing dialogue between past patterns and emerging possibilities. But with each aligned choice, the new identity gains credibility. It becomes less theoretical and more experiential. Others may start to notice the shift before you fully recognize it yourself. They respond differently to your presence. They trust your reliability. They sense a steadiness that was not there before. What feels like quiet internal work to you begins to manifest as visible character. Eventually, a profound realization takes hold. You are no longer forcing yourself to become someone else. You are remembering who you have been building all along through silent choices that, over time, reconstructed not only your habits, but your very sense of self. Stop. There is a moment after all the silent work, after the friction, the doubt, the invisible progress, and the gradual reconstruction of identity, when life becomes very simple again, not easier, but clearer. You begin to see that the complexity you once associated with transformation was never truly necessary. The endless searching for the perfect system, the ideal moment, the flawless mindset, all of it was an attempt to avoid a truth that now feels almost obvious. Your future has always been shaped by what you repeatedly choose in ordinary moments. Nothing more, nothing less. This realization can feel both grounding and unsettling. Grounding because it removes confusion. It reveals that you do not need extraordinary talent, dramatic breakthroughs, or constant motivation to become someone different. You need direction, you need awareness, and you need the willingness to honor a single silent choice more often. Then you ignore it, unsettling because it removes excuses. If identity is constructed through repetition, then every day becomes significant. Every delay teaches something. Every aligned action teaches something else. The responsibility is continuous. Not overwhelming, but undeniable. You are always practicing who you are becoming. Look back at your own life for a moment. Consider how many times you have waited for clarity before acting. How often you have assumed that confidence must appear first, that certainty must be guaranteed. That transformation should feel inspiring before it becomes real. These beliefs are comforting because they postpone commitment. They allow you to remain in preparation without confronting the quiet demands of participation. But clarity is often the result of movement. Confidence is often the memory of repeated courage. Meaning is often discovered only after you begin. The invitation, then, is not to reinvent yourself overnight. It is to notice the doorway that is already open. Tonight, when you feel the familiar pull toward distraction, you can choose presence. Tomorrow morning, when the alarm sounds and comfort invites you back into unconscious repetition, you can choose intention. In a conversation where impatience rises, you can choose restraint. None of these choices will feel historic in the moment. They will feel small, almost forgettable. You may even question whether they matter at all. Yet over weeks, months, and years, these quiet decisions accumulate into something unmistakable. They become character, they become trust in yourself, they become a life that feels authored, rather than inherited. The silent choice that defines who you ultimately become is not hidden in some distant future. It is not waiting for perfect circumstances or dramatic realization. It exists now, in the next decision you are about to make. The next action that either aligns with your deeper potential or postpones it once again. No one else can see. This choice as clearly as you can. No one else can make it on your behalf. This is what makes it powerful, and this is what makes it yours.